in that I view every bit of information I take in as an aspect of, a metaphysical toolbox I've got. If I can take these things, all of them, and not stick to one of them in any one way and blend them together in a way that does emotionally and spiritually resonate with me, then I have nothing to be afraid of. And that I can be stoic and emotional and loving and caring of God, but also cynical and atheistic all at once.
Yeah, but wouldn't you be a walking, talking oxymoron?
I already am.
The evolutionist who has this gobbledygook, which I believe is the reason for evolution, is so they can say there's totally not a God, I can do whatever I want. But anyway,
Right. And
so
that's a bit
the
far-fetched, I think.
I know, but it's my stance, and so I agree that I have a certain bias there, but
I
I'm
can
just
feel
saying,
it.
I can admit that. But anyway,
And you go back into this kind of feedback loop where you start realizing that we really dictate our own morality, where everybody in this room has their own slight skew of it, where I think something's right that you might think that's wrong. But ultimately, we go back to these guide stones that are creationism, or my idea from earlier of what's best for the community through the base most biological urge to form a group and make a tribe. That's what's best for that group. There's so many different angles for that, but ultimately I think it's the individual.
Well, my question then would be to that. My follow up to that would be, so what happens when that group interacts with another group who has a different set
You
of
get the
morals?
crusades.
and so, so
People want to know that they're doing a good thing, and even if it might not be a good thing. Yeah, most of the most popular world religions are going to have good factors to it, because if they didn't, you know what I mean, then it wouldn't be attractive. You believe that, the Old Testament guy was a little more stern and strict than the New Testament guy, right?
I like to believe that they're almost completely separate people in a lot of aspects.
Wow. Yeah, and so that's where you and I totally disagree.
anyone can follow
It
some
seems
pagan
like you
religion.
tend to focus on the wrong quite a bit.
What do you mean?
Look at the entire human race and what are we doing? We're always striving to understand more. And the ultimate truth in that regard is understanding and better preparing ourselves to, look for that truth. And I don't think we're ever going to find it.
So let me ask this question then, and this is my last question. Can there ever be peace without absolute truth?
No.
On this earth, you've been on this earth like 20 years. I've been here 40.
Sure.
And we're both trying to sit here and pontificate about the cosmos,
Right.
as if we know something.
But
You know what I'm
that's the
saying?
difference.
But
That's the difference here. Is I wanted to ask you earlier before we got cut off about our evolutionary talk, and it was why must you be so concrete?
okay, I will. That leads up to what if you look on the chat, PJ posted
Sure,
something
sure.
about Darwin's
Full
full
title of
title
Origin
for
of
Origin of the
Species.
Species,
Yeah.
which I love pointing to that all the time when talking
But
with
that's the thing. That's the thing is you assume that there is a God, while I assume that there must most likely either be or not be a God at the same time. You must entertain both angles
right.
of operation.
Well, I know, but you did ask where I came by my certainty, and I
Sure,
wanted
sure,
to
sure.
share that. So if you look at my quote or my little message there, it has basically the major world religions, and right next to it, their sacred text.
Of course.
Each religion has some sort of text or texts plural that they kind of formulate their belief system around. That's the basis of it. Mine obviously is the Holy Bible, but I have studied many of the other world religions as far as what they teach, and also kind of looked into their sacred texts Granted, not as thoroughly as I have studied my own, but looking through them, I see a difference in that these other texts generally have one author who people considered was to be a wise man, and that man is now dead.
Hmm.
And then aside from that, the Bible is more a library than one singular book,
Oh,
and it's
absolutely.
over the course of centuries. And so it's many, many different authors, but you can see the thread throughout. And the hinging centerpiece of why I believe the Bible, whereas I reject the other sacred texts, is the talking about scientific. I believe the Bible is the thinking man's holy writ because it has the prophetic history laid out.
Hmm.
And the Bible even says these are the ahead of time, these are the prophecies of what's going to happen. I'm telling you this ahead of time so that you'll know later as these things are fulfilled that, hey, you know what? I was right all along. So then you can trust me. To just brush over the whole Adam and Eve story, God created the garden, in 6 days. He created Adam. Adam looked around, saw that he was alone. God said, it's not good he's alone, so I'm going to make him a wife. And so he puts Adam to sleep. He does not create Eve in front of him where he can see, oh my goodness, God's taking this rib out of my side. He's making mud, breathing into it. Eve is now alive. So I have proof. He put Adam to sleep, made Eve, and then woke them both up. So then they would have to, in faith, when he says, hi, I'm God, I just made you, they have to either believe or disbelieve him. That is the great test. And that's why
Right.
one of the main parts of the Bible says, it's we can only please God by believing him in faith. And so
Right.
that's the whole test is, are we going to have faith in what he says or not? But then at the same time, God says, faith is the only way, or the only thing you have, just as the evolutionist who has this gobbledygook, which I believe is the reason for evolution, is so they can say, there's totally not a God, I can do whatever I want. But anyway,
Right. And
so
that's a bit far-fetched, I think.
I know, but it's my stance, and so I agree that I have a certain bias there, but
I
I'm
can
just
feel
saying,
it.
I can admit that. But anyway, God says you got to have faith in me, but here are my proofs. And
Hmm.
so 800 years before it all happened, like the prophet Daniel broke down the succession of kingdoms through the world. After that, he named certain conquerors by name, and there's a ton. There's about Jesus himself specifically. There are over 300 prophecies that had to be specifically fulfilled in order for him to be him. And so, and that's just about Jesus. That's not about all the other prophecies. And you can, when you start reading through Bible prophecy, one after another, you can be like, oh, hey, this was like 800 years beforehand. Talked about Alexander the Great, and talked about the Medes and Persians, Cyrus being the general who would lead them. All of this stuff you can read and verify. You can take the history books and open them up all around the Bible in the center, and you can point, like you're talking about how you do them string boards when you're doing conspiracy
Yeah.
theory things. You can string board the Bible and the history books and show how the Bible is verifiably true.
So
And because of that, I'm like, hey, you know what? If it's true about that, then when God says he created the world in 6 literal days and rested the seventh, I'm like, okay, that makes a lot more sense than nothing went bang.
to answer that kind of in reverse, or answer to it, I guess I'd have to say that me personally, I have a lot of very nebulous ideas about the Bible, where I think it can be interpreted literally. I think it can be interpreted symbolically. in the sense of, taking the rib from man and making that. It's like, how literal is that to a fault before it starts seeming like a Greek mythology tale about a hero fighting a manticore, which we have no records of a manticore existing. How far do you have to, pull things? And it's like leaning one way or the other. It's like you can see it in both angles. But the thing I wanted to touch on with that is I think, and you just kind of gave me this idea here with all the things I've been listening to recently, that maybe these systems are cyclic. And the idea being is you can say a prophecy, but prophecies are never specific. Prophecies are never a man by the name of Tim Jones will show up at this store at this day on this time and lead a great rebellion. It's always a great man of utter importance will appear and lead the masses. And to that degree, it's more or less a matter of time until somebody fitting a bill shows up and does the thing that's required out of, people would say, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Self-fulfilling prophecy, and that something needs to get done, so I might as well do it. And in the case of God, I mean, maybe he predicted himself to a point where I'm going to need to send Jesus at some point to do something, so I'm just going to let people know ahead of time that it might happen. And going even further backwards, the 7-day creationism, when resting on the seventh and all of that, attributing the same amount of literal and symbolic nature to that, what is a day to a god?
Well, let me ask this to counter that question. When you consider the day, the month, and the year, they're all based on the heavenly bodies.
Right.
You have the day, one rotation of the earth, the month, one phase cycle of the moon, 1 year, one trip around the sun, but there is absolutely zero anything in the celestial bodies that would regulate the 7-day week.
Right.
And so across history, men have thought, because men always think they're so smart, they're like, hey, you know what, I can do better than, the 7-day week. I can do an 8-day week, I can do a 10-day week, I can do a 6-day week. Like, all these things have been tried, and what's so crazy is it throws their societies into utter chaos.
Right.
And I think April Fool's Day is even a result of one of those, or like the origins of April Fool's was when they tried to make a 10-day week or something. And that one I could be completely wrong on. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I don't know.
Yeah, this has been tried several times. And so what I'm saying is, oh, hang on, bro. He always is on my case if I ever interrupt him. All I'm gonna wrap up that with saying is, yeah, wow, indeed, ooh-wee. And back to your whole thing about the whole mythological other creation stories or other other religions. Here's the only other thing I will put out there. In considering all the other religions compared to Christianity, all the other religions are based around how do I, the mere mortal human, appease God, whereas
Not
Christianity is all about how does God, sweet talk me. You know what I'm saying? No, seriously, we're
I'm laughing
running
between
around
agreements.
We're running around acting all crazy, and the whole Bible is full of God saying, listen, you can do better. I can help you. I can do this for you. I can do that for you. I'll send my son. You kill him. You know what? Yeah, we'll resurrect him. He'll resurrect himself, whatever. And we will go to the ends of our capability to try to get you to, join my side. And there is ultimate threat and judgment, but the whole Bible is God bending over backwards, trying to woo us back to him instead of us needing to climb to a mountaintop and, sacrifice a kid or something to get God, whatever God to be.
But how
okay
many
with
things
us.
has man sacrificed in the name of God? Just look at the Crusades.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that they were right. Anyone can follow a right religion wrongly. You know what I'm saying? just like anyone can follow.
It seems like you tend to focus on the wrong quite a bit.
What do you mean?
Well, you say the phrase that caught me a little bit was you said basically every religion in the world focuses on man's appeasement to God, appeasing a God. But then you look at things like Buddhism, and even in the case of Greek or Roman beliefs, there was a lot of focus on the individual and their relation to God, much in the similar way of Christian beliefs. In the case of Buddhism, it's not so much a God as it's realizing that all is divine and that you should learn to live in synergy. Like, I do agree that you can appreciate the right religion the wrong way. That goes for any teaching or system of belief in the world. But that's why I firmly believe that everything is right and everything is wrong, because there's so many truths spread around and so many falsities spread around. And in the same way that scientists have an agenda, so do preachers and rewriters of the Bible. We don't possess the original word.
Dead Sea Scrolls, man, you got to check them
Yeah,
out.
yeah. No, I know of them.
Okay, well, but the other thing is the Greek religions has zero to do with anything like Christianity.
I agree
Like
with that.
it's not even close, even a little bit. But as far as Buddhism, it's not so much that you're trying to live in synergy as you're trying to not exist, because the whole deal about Buddhism is they believe that all life is pain. No, like all life. And so Nirvana is basically, being absorbed and into nothingness, because if you don't have life, then you don't have pain. And so Buddhists are like the ultimate pessimists.
And what is Stoicism?
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I mean, it's their whole goal is non-existence.
And that's the thing, though, is non-existence is a very interesting. I mean, I don't want to get too far off topic here. I keep seeing.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're on topic, but the conversation is between y'all.
Yeah, that kind of.
I'm over here trying to interject a few times. You know what I mean? And,
I notice.
No, it's not your fault though, Mike.
Oh, you trying to say it's my fault, is it? Is that what you're saying, bro?
Hey, shit, we supposed to be sharing the panel, bro. But yeah.
My bad.
Great. No, it's all good, bro. I understand. That's how I be so absorbed with this brother while we at work, man. I'm telling you. Like, Oh
yeah, people will walk in all day and have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, right. So the last time I did this in the interview, I kept letting everybody go ahead of me and I didn't get to go. But
okay, I'm
going to go ahead and let PJ go real quick. And I hope it's not too much off the topic, because I want to kind of stay here for a minute because I got a few points to make. But go ahead, PJ.
You go ahead, Dean. I gotta recapture my thought.
Okay, all right. So
I like that phrase. It's a nice phrase. I have to recapture my thoughts. I think I'll be using that from now on.
So there was a few points that was made that I kind of want to come back on. Like, for one, there was a point that that TJ made when he had said that how he made an illustration of how when you think about other religions, it's about them appeasing God. And then when you think about Christianity, it's about basically what God has already done for us. And not only that, but what he goes through in order to get our attention. You know what I mean? So that he can give us an abundance of life, basically. Jesus himself said that I came so that you can have life and so that you can have it more abundantly. And then I go back to the Old Testament. Now, remember when you and I had that discussion, you believe that, the Old Testament guy was a little more stern and strict than the New Testament guy, right?
I like to believe that they're almost completely separate people in a lot of aspects.
Wow. Yeah, and so that's where you and I totally disagree, and I'm sure we're going to have more conversations where we can discuss it more, and I could probably bring up some points, but this is the thing. This is something that came from the Old Testament God. You say you believe that they're two totally different entities, right?
Almost, yeah.
Okay, so Jesus in the New Testament, he said, he referred to him as, basically, he said to one of his disciples, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father, right? And again, who's to say Jesus wasn't in the Old Testament as well?
And what would you attribute that to? Like, hypothetically speaking, who would be Jesus in the Old Testament if that's the case?
I believe that Jesus in the Old Testament would be who Moses went up on Mount Sinai to talk to, and when he came down with his face shining, I believe that was Jesus.
I actually really like that. I'd never thought of it in that light before.
Yeah, you know, it was the Father who said that he couldn't see him, you know, and so he put him in the cleft of the rock while he passed by him. That couldn't have been Christ then, because Christ is God incarnate. Well, later on, but he also came incarnate and exposed himself to Abraham as well, Abraham and Sarah, you know. And so, yeah, before Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, they went and had lunch with Abraham, or maybe it was dinner. I don't know. But,
a meal.
Could have been breakfast. But what I'm saying is, like, it was like Abraham, you know, they had such a high thing for visitors, but he also knew it was something very special about one of them, and the other two were angels. So God appeared to, you know, several people. I believe it was even to Samson's parents as well. And so, you know, there was several places in the Bible where God appeared to people on a personal level. That's kind of why it alluded to why I asked you, do you believe that he's personal? And I actually do like and respect the answer that you gave. But this is what God said in the Old Testament, Isaiah, and it's actually where I got the title from this show, you know, where we reason together. You know, now granted, I took some words out of place, you know, because it's like reasoning. I kind of explained it to you earlier, reasoning to gather, whereas in the Bible it says, and this from Isaiah in the Old Testament, chapter 1, verse 18, come now and let us reason together, saith the Lord. And then he said this, though your sins may be as scarlet, meaning red and you know, dirty, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If ye be obedient, if ye be willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. So he makes promises based on conditions, but yet it's for their own good. He also says, but if ye refuse and rebel, ye shall be devoured with the sword. For the mouth of the Lord hath spoken. He has saved them from slavery, from captivity. And he brought them out to a land so that he could fulfill his promises to Abraham, you know, but for their good. And not just for their good, for the rest of the world good, because when he took Abraham out, he told Abraham that he wanted him to be an example to the world of how good he is. Because a lot of the world, they lost that thought process when sin came in, you know, and so they went off in their own way. And you know how you said, like, everything has like a good aspect in it, you know, every religion and everything like that. Remember that analogy I gave you earlier about the counterfeit money?
Yeah, the one, and I guess you'd explain that for everybody in whoever's viewing the counterfeit money idea.
Okay, I don't remember how I explained it to you, but okay, so I just put it out there like, okay, so I asked you the question of what's deception? And you said, well, basically, you know, it's something like the truth, but you know,
it's a false truth. It's a convincing of you know, it's deception. It's convincing one using logic to believe something that is either false or negative.
Right. But and then I challenged you by asking you, would you agree that it would take a whole lot of truth, but not entirely? That's I know I didn't say it like that, but it takes a whole lot of truth, but not entirely, in order for deception to be deception, right? Right. Okay.
Well, it's like I could sit here and tell you the 47th president was Jacob Randerson, and that, you know, in the 1800s, it's whenever we invented the flywheel, and you'd probably believe me if you weren't read up on the situation. But if I actually struggle to tell you who the true 47th president is, if we even have one, you know, it's like I'm gonna have to Google that now. It's so much harder to tell the truth.
Yeah,
it's really easy to lie to somebody.
But the concept of deception is it takes a great amount of truth in order for it to be believable to deceive somebody. And then that's when I brought up the concept of the counterfeit money. You can't make counterfeit money out of something like for once, you can't make a counterfeit $3 bill because there's not a real one. And then I told you about there was once a counterfeit money that was created that only 2 of the world banks could identify, and so they had to basically hire special agents in order to be able to identify when this counterfeit money came into banks. And so the only way that they were able to be trained was that they had to study real money to a T. Basically, nooks, cranny, like every bit of the dollar bill or the whatever bill, it had to be studied to a T, to the point where they know it so well that once they see a counterfeit, no matter how close it looks like to the real thing, they could spot it out. And so that's what I mean, and I use that analogy, and honestly, it's kind of funny that I'm kind of going here because that's basically where that analogy comes from. Yeah, most of the most popular world religions are going to have good factors to it, because if they didn't, you know what I mean, then it wouldn't be attractive. I told you how the Bible says that the devil disguises himself as an angel of light. And the reason why he does is because if he showed himself for who he was from the jump, most people won't be attracted. People want to know that they're doing a good thing, and even if it might not be a good thing. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
And so like, to me, everything can't be right if it contradicts each other. You know what I'm saying? Because if the true essence of everything contradicts each other, then it can't be right. So it has to be something that everything fell off of. And we talked about the Abrahamic belief structure and that kind of thing earlier as well. And I told you, and you said that you would rather use that instead of Christians. I would prefer that you say Christians than the Abrahamic, because really Christians believe what Abraham believed, And so,
and then my reasoning for using that at the time too, whenever I say Abrahamic belief, it's a blanket term over Christianity, but to simply say that Christian beliefs are of the Old Testament when citing the Old Testament, it's a little contradictory. It's a little incorrect. So I'll say something like, oh, sorry. I'll say something along the lines of it's, an Abrahamic idea, which means it does come from the root. Yeah. I think maybe it would be, maybe there's a better term for it, but it's the one that I'd used for the longest, because it does blanket everything. It blankets everything from that point onwards. And that, I think I referenced it as the imagery of a tree, where the belief of Abraham was the roots, and we have so many branches now: Catholicism, Baptist, Latter-day Saints, Mormons. You have so many different belief systems based off of one, and so many splits and reformations, that to simply call it Christianity when reciting that, it comes after the fact, and you have to cite Old Testament for a lot of this stuff too, I think.
Yeah, and even within Christianity, there still is only one truth, and the Bible basically is the depictor of that truth. And to be honest, to live by what to live in accordance to the Bible is to live by the truth, because Jesus was referred to the Word. The Bible is the Word. He was referred to the truth. The Bible is the truth. He was referred to as the light. The Bible is the light. You know what I mean? And so, like,
okay,
you get what I'm saying? So everything within it, the Bible is about Jesus, from the Old Testament to the New Testament. It all points to Christ as our Savior, our Redeemer, our Lord, our Savior, our Judge, our, every single thing.
But even so, you have the belief that Jesus is a component of God, and something I wanted to touch on was that God had many faces. You have I believe it's a Catholic thing specifically, maybe, but you have the God, the light, the Holy Spirit, in Jesus Christ, and all these different facets, which are actual tangible facets that are related to and talked about in the Scripture. And in that sense, what you just told me is that the whole point of the Bible is to get you to believe in God. If it's the point of Jesus and Jesus is a redeemer, then he had to send down a child of himself to learn to live as a man. It had deviated so far from the point of God that he had to figure out what exactly was going on and how to
I
relate
don't know
to it.
about that though.
That's what I believe. That's what I've seen through.
How did you come up with that concept of belief though? What made you like because when it comes to Christ, most major religions believe in him.
Hmm.
You know,
That was my second thing with the idea of if the truth is God, then let's set aside for the moment that the Christian God is the correct and that God is just a concept, an idea. And at that point, would it be possible to have multiple tool sets to acquire that truth and understand that truth? Would that be an idea?
in a sense, and I think we had that talk. But I'm gonna go ahead and let PJ go because he got his hand up and he's been waiting. And but remember, we talked about the triune God or the Godhead, whereas there's a Father, there's a Son, and there's a Holy Spirit.
That's what it was. It's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, but go ahead, PJ.
Okay, peace.
Take your hand down.
Just taking us back and then taking us forward, you know. Now anyone can respond to this or anyone can keep silence. But just going back to what I asked about the farmer, you know, I was just wondering, do farmers bank on evolution happening or evolution not happening? When they plant a tomato, are they banking on that tomato to transform into something else, or for it to remain a tomato? Just a thought. Now, going on to my questions. Question I have two. Number one, who decides what truth and what morals are? That's question number one. Who decides and who makes the standard of what truth and what moral is? And that's question number one. Question number two is, I believe we all are in agreement that the earth has an origin. True? Okay.
Yeah.
The earth has an origin. And I believe that we're all in agreement that the human mind has an origin.
Yes.
True? All right. Is it safe to say that belief has an origin?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Faith didn't just pop up overnight.
Okay. So the earth has an origin, the human mind has an origin, belief has an origin. Is it possible that if belief has an origin, that there is an original belief?
Yes, absolutely. We were just talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay. And so now those are my two. That question is more of a thought one, but my main question is, who gets to decide what truth and what moral is?
So, unless anybody else wants to go, I have a few really good inputs for that.
You talk, bro.
Okay. Okay. So to answer your first question, it was more of three. I guess I'll address the first thing with the tomato and the idea of banking on science and all these things. And it's that case of, I mean, the direct answer is simply if you're banking on science, you're not going to expect your tomato to turn into a cucumber plant. Again, that's ludicrous. But we're at a point now, and the phrase that's thrown around a lot is where we're going to play God, where we can do genetic orientation and reorientation and modification to objects, where we can effectively make something into something else or share qualities of something else. A carrot with tomato-like properties. Well, then you have to ask yourself, do you want it to be more of a carrot or more of a tomato? And you're going to start with a basis. We're not quite at a point yet where we can, scientific community wise, where we can simply make something from nothing. There always has to be a basis. We were talking about conspiracies and things earlier before the show came up, just as a topic at hand, and the idea was that bioweapons were at play in some crazy vast ideas. And it's like the idea of a bioweapon, you don't just make a virus. It has to be based upon multiple other viruses or qualities of viruses and mimicking those qualities. You can't just make something from nothing or bank on something changing overnight. It's a long process. I mean, we could even tie that into the whole idea that I brought up of what is a day to a god earlier, where things aren't just going to happen. A day in Genesis could simply be thousands of years, and as a matter of fact, that would line up more in accordance with what scientists believe to be the forming process of the Earth. It took millions of billions of years, and I'd like to say, and I'm probably totally wrong here, that it would have taken somewhere around 6 billion, which happens to line up with the idea of it taking 6 days. But you have your hand up, or you?
Okay, so I definitely have a question to that. And my
Hmm.
question would be, is there a way to 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt prove that? Prove that the date, because um if it can be a dates in the millions of years or the billions of years, can it also then on the other hand be in the thousands? Is there, I don't know, like, is there a way to absolutely
There
pinpoint?
actually is. It's called carbon dating, and we do it in Antarctica all the time. And whenever we can't get an absolute take on other ideas, we'll basically drill a giant hole all the way down to the Earth's mantle and pull up a giant ice chute and a rock chute. And then we'll take and I'm not terribly certain of the processes behind it, but it's basically we'll date those pieces of rock based on like some electron something another, and it's the idea is you look at that and that'll tell you roughly how old that thing is, and we're pretty certain about how old the Earth is, and I'd have to Google it to tell you the exact numbers, but we can do that concretely.
That's interesting. So my next question then would be, how accurate is the test? Is there any, because there's a lot of variables that goes
Absolutely.
into testing. One thing is consistency.
Hmm.
Um, if we are using the test today, like if I say, there's things that we got to take into account, like gravity. Has gravity always been the same as it is today? If you light a candle right now, and let's say for instance you didn't see the candle, um but let me go back, so let's say you and I both at different, in your home you light a candle, in my home I light a candle, and we met, and your candle was 75% burned down and mine was 50% burned down, and we just asked the question, how long have they been burning? I don't know that we'll be able to come to a concrete answer, even if yours was 50% and mine was 50%. There's no way to tell how long it would be burning because of the variables.
And that's the
You
thing,
know,
is you absolutely could do that, and then you'd have to do some things of okay, well, how many kinds of commonly used candles do we have in the United States? Because we both live in the United States. Okay, let's narrow it down to what I would assume to be, like example, of course, the Texas area. Well, that's quite a big area. Well, let's look at the demographic of how many households and how many different cities in the state of Texas use which kinds of candles. And then once you break it down to that point, well, what's the composition of the wicks of the most popular used candles in the United States? And as you narrow it down further and further and further, you can get a very concrete idea of this specific brand has a wick that burns as long as it does, and another brand of particular count has for burns as long as it does. And then you can begin to point together, well, there's certain fibers in this brand, and there's a weave structure in this other brand. Well, through that deductive reasoning, we can quite definitely say that it has burned for a set amount of time, and while every candle is individualistically different, you can get a pretty decent margin of error there, where you've narrowed it down to something to be like maybe an 80 to 90% assurancy.
and that right there, that is, all things considered, um every detail is the same. So, and like that, all the variables have to match in order for that to be true. So when you take one candle in one environment and you have one in another environment, the environments have to be pretty much the same in order for, like, all other things have to line up the same in order for it to burn the exact same way, the exact same time. And so, and that's the point that I'm getting to, is that there's no way to determine, how do we prove that environment has been constant all the way throughout millions of years? I
Well,
don't
and we
know.
know that it hasn't been
Okay.
through
So
similar
now,
methods.
so now that goes back to our dating method then, because we can't use a dating method that is based on a constant when there's other variables that clearly things have changed.
And the reason we use the carbon, to my knowledge, the reason we use the carbon dating format is because it is a constant. Most things on our planet are made of carbon, both down to the rock, organisms, and everything in between. And it usually shares the common thread of having carbon atoms in it. And because of that, and because of the way those atoms work, we can deduce different rates of decay and different rates of age. And the idea, I mean, maybe you might be thinking that whenever you pull a rock cylinder up from drilling hundreds and thousands of feet down, you you're going to get different amounts of consistency, and that actually even helps in the same way that they date trees, or they have the tree earrings. And for people unfamiliar with that concept, it's you cut a tree down and you can see little rings on the inside of it, and the length between those rings is quite consistent with the years that tree has in age. And you do the same thing with rock to a degree, where you pull rock up and you can tell different ways of how that rock has formed and which periods it had been formed in, and that's how actually we know that the Earth wasn't formed consistently. That's not to say that it couldn't be put down. And I think to ping pong off of it, go ahead.
Well, one
You
thing,
go.
if I could jump in right quick. So I want you to bear in mind that story you shared about how the Smithsonian burned some bones because the premise they found from them didn't match whatever
Wanting to
hypothesis they
say,
were
yeah.
trying to prove. So when you have evolutionists, the whole problem with their, I don't want to say body politic, the whole promise with their thesis is that they're starting, this is their premise. There is no God. How do we prove it? And then therefore XYZ.
I think
And
you'd be
so
surprised at the
everything,
number of scientists who do believe in God.
right. And that's why you can look at, there's a thing called a scientific dissent, not like descent, like going down, but dissent, like dissenting, like disagreeing with a scientific dissent of evolution. And there are some, I think last I looked, there was over 1,000 like doctorate level scientists who said, yeah, evolution is bunk. So I totally agree with what you just said, man. But I just shared a link, and it's something
I'm
that,
looking at it here, yeah.
yeah, there was some World War II planes. They ran out of gas or fuel, whatever, airplane fuel. And so they had to ditch on Iceland. And they more or less had an okay landing. They weren't all busted up and cracked up. So the pilots reported back, hey, when the weather clears, let's try and go back and get the planes if we can or whatever. And that was, to my knowledge of the whole story, it was a bit towards the end of the war. The weather got real bad. They never could find the planes again. And so they just carried on, and the war ended. And they're like, whatever, just leave them be. And then years later, in the early 90s, people are like, hey, let's see if we can find them. And so they started going around. And as you can read in that little brief website, there's a lot of others that go further into it. They finally found them and drilled down what would, according to common scientific knowledge, be 2,000 years worth of ice formation. But here it was early 90s. WW2 was in the 40s, mid 40s. You know, so we're talking like 50
And you see, there's a bit of a
years difference.
dissonance here. There's a bit of a dissonance here because it depends entirely on the area. To my knowledge, it depends on climates, and they don't tend to drill for ice cores in areas with large amounts of, snow deposit or ice deposit. And a lot of the times they'll actually reference rock versus ice.
Okay.
Because
Well,
this is
I don't know.
entirely correct. There's actually
you
a
talking-
similar. Go
Are
ahead.
you talking petrification?
Which?
Petrification.
Which one of us?
When you said you talk about rocks rather than ice.
It's
You're
not
talking about-
necessarily petrification. It's like layers of tectonics and geology kinds of things where rock will layer in a certain way. In the mantle, the actual earth, like the actual kind of rock that's in there, I forget the name. But they'll measure that in the same kind of way, to my knowledge. But there's an interesting story too going off of this, the World War II plane. There was another one regarding ships where they were exploring the Arctic in the early 19 or late 1800s. They were exploring the Arctic, and they actually had to do a similar kind of thing where they had to abandon a ship and eventually had to thaw it out from a bunch of ice. And I think that only recently happened. There was something similar to that, and it's actually the same wood of that ship was used in the Oval Office desk. That's a cool story. That's probably a good thread to find that off of because I forget the name specifics. But yeah, no, there's a point somebody in here made a few ago about how consistency, and I think you'll find that a lot of scientific methods for things are very consistent. We don't tend to use non-consistent ideas, and as a matter of fact, the scientific method revolves around consistency. You test things with control groups and multiple things under multiple tests, sometimes even, to see if you get a specific result or not, and how consistent it is, and what variables there are. I mean, bringing it back to the candle concept with burning, you would burn multiple kinds of candles to see which would, or see with what carbon scoring would show if the candle stopped burning. There's so many ways to tell this, and it's not that science typically tends to want to disprove these things. It's that science tends to bring up very interesting contradictions about specific points, and then people get a little over arrogant and point at it and say, look, God isn't real. And I think that's definitely what it is a level of arrogance, because to me, science is nothing more than a tool to explain the world around us.
I agree.
Gotcha.
With that being said, right? So you heard of the term creation scientist, right?
I actually haven't.
Wow. Yeah, that's weird because I was talking to a friend of mine who he had a degree in biology, and the crazy thing is when I was working with him, Tyler knows him. We were both working with him when I became a Christian, and we were discussing science, and I was talking about creation scientists, and he said that's an oxymoron. I said no, it's not. He said they totally contradict each other. I said no, it's not, because to me, and the reason why I absolutely love science, is because it proves creation more, and all the more to me.
It's the example that I used about the
yeah. The more I learn it, the more that I see, that there had to be a creator, and so to kind of go back to the macroevolution thing, and I know y'all spent a lot of time on it, so I'm trying to get out, it to me, it would honestly contradict the factor of a creator, a biblical creator, because
evolution.
Yeah, well, not evolution, but macro evolution.
Okay.
I believe in micro, but I just like kind of like what TJ said, I believe that it's just adaptation. But if you guys want to make it a science, not you guys, but if they want to label it, and it's more evolutionists than scientists, I believe, as a micro evolution, okay. But the thing is, we were created, we were fearfully and wonderfully created, right? And in that sense, he made us to be very resilient. That's why, you don't just die when you smoke a cigarette. You know, it takes years and years and years and years and years and years, but he made our bodies to be incredible healing vessels as well. You know, because did you know that after not smoking a cigarette for 24 hours, you have already decreased your chance at cancer by 50%? You know what I'm saying? So it's many factors like that. It's the mystery of the eye, and why everything has not been figured out about it. You know, the cells in certain flowers and just the stem and all that kind of stuff. Like it to me, those things can't just happen. You know, just like you see a beautiful drawing, you know, just like you see any kind of architect or any type of engineering done, like with the cars and ships and that sort of thing. They all have a maker. Somebody had to think of the design, put it down on paper, and come up with the ins and outs, the mechanical and the engine. You
Then
know,
what
all
about,
that
okay,
to be
I
done,
have a challenge
you know.
to that.
Okay,
What of the mantis shrimp?
you talking about the
You
one
know,
that punched?
it's the one that punches. You think the interesting thing about that is no other creature on this planet can do that, and its eyes can actually see every wavelength of light
Yeah,
possible.
yeah. Yeah, all the more that you know, how did something like that come to be? You know what I mean? And so it's still.
I
When
find
I
a lot
look,
of the time that the creationism tends to be quite selfish, and that it assumes man is the ultimate. And that's, while I don't believe that's entirely untrue, it excludes quite a lot of other things, and you know.
well, I mean, but we are though. What other thing is more intelligent than us on Earth? What other thing can create the way we do on Earth? You got beavers that create dams, but look at ours compared to that.
Right,
You know,
right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
you know, now granted, we learn a lot from the animals. You
We learn
know,
a
the
lot from
reason why we're
nature
able
as
to
well,
fly and the reason why we're able to go in the water for, you know, thousands of leagues is because of watching animals being able to do it.
and
You
watching the
know,
environment, how the
observing.
environment
Yeah,
works. Right.
yeah, yeah. You know, but they can't. They don't have the multifacets that we have. You know, they can't reason like we can. You
That's
know, not
that was what I was talking about at work earlier, about cognition and the difference
right.
between
Cognition.
sapience
Yeah,
and
right.
sentience.
Yeah, yeah. And so why, I mean, that's a true statement to believe that, you know, a creator made us to have dominion over the animals and the fishes and the birds. Yeah. When we were put here to take care of it, not to destroy it like we have been, you know. At one point we did used to take care of them. But when this thing called sin entered the world, it brought this thing called fear, which took basically the relationship between man and animal away. And later on, meat eating was introduced as well.
And you see, there's a really interesting question to pose, and I'd like to pose it after I see what you have to say. You've had your hand up for quite a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, TJ. I mean, PJ.
No. I forgot to lower my hand. Sorry.
Oh, it's all good. So the thing I wanted to pose, and it's a very interesting question, is and I think this ties into an earlier discussion topic of where does an atheist get their morals?
That's a good question, and I think that's where PJ was going with that. So
Because the idea that, and I want to arc this back into something, but you really kind of peaked that with saying the lost relation between man and the environment and animals. That really peaked that, where it's like, yeah, where does an atheist get their morals? And I have something I want to go off with that.
Well, for one, I believe that morals are inherently in all of us, because the Bible says that God has given a measure of faith to everyone. He also said that everyone is without excuse. In fact, I can find it for you. And it sounds a lot better coming exactly from the word itself, where.
Well, and if I could jump in while you check that out.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask, I guess, and this is one thing, I have a couple other friends who are atheists who grew up Christian. And to me, the moral, underpinnings that they have are completely founded in cultural Christianity, if not, the fact that they were in church at some point. But so it's almost like you heard of like a vestigial limb or a vestigial organ.
I like
To
the
me, it's
appendix you
like
mentioned earlier.
yeah, like the appendix. So to me, the atheists that are like in Christian, quote unquote, Christian nations, and they have these ideologies that of right and wrong, it's a vestigial Christianity that has imparted them to them. For instance, if we're going to talk about straight taking things at face value, according to evolution, it's all about survival of the fittest and each individual's struggle to, pass along their, on the individual level, each individual's struggle to pass on their genetic information versus the other. So if we're gonna bring that to its ultimate logical conclusion, that means rape is okay. Because if she says no, but you're like, hey, I want to pass on my genes, and then the dude forces the issue, in the long run, if you look at it, there is no God to answer to.
I think
And
that's
all
a
there
very
is,
cynical view.
it's not a cynical. If
I think
there
that's
is
an
no
extremely cynical view, and for the reasoning of if you're
Okay.
an evolutionary believer, you believe in the idea of the pack mentality. We see this in wolves and flocks of birds and multiple types of
Okay,
things.
let
Human
me
is a
counter.
trap.
Let me counter. We're not
Quickly.
primates.
One
Sorry,
person
we're
at a
not.
time.
Okay,
We're
well,
not
okay,
canine.
that's fine. I don't believe that we're primates. I believe that maybe we're descended from them, but the idea that I'm making here is it's undeniable fact that in the world
Okay.
we're very tribalistic. Would it not make
I
sense to see the better of the tribe and of your family and of your group not to rape somebody because you'd be cast out? Therefore, it's very inherently wrong to do so, and I think if you grab a average Joe off the street, they'd be so inclined to believe regardless of their disposition.
Well, right, because that's the vestigial Christianity where consider the orangutan. In the orangutan social structure, you have the alpha who sets up a territory and they actually genetically flange out. You've seen them at orangutans with like the huge round face. And but then if you look, that happens, there's something on the gene level when he can, through his might, he can stake out a certain territory and kick out all the other males. His genes literally change and he grows super long shaggy hair and he grows like a bigger muscular structure and his head becomes super huge, where a male orangutan that is not able to establish a territory, he stays in like an adolescent form for life until such time that he can actually establish and hold a territory. That's the
Okay.
trigger. And there are such orangutan males who can never, just like in humans, you got some dudes that are like big and buff and some dudes that are like, 5'1" and kind of weak. And so they couldn't physically enforce their will. In the orangutan world, same thing. You got some that are genetically blessed, others not. And so the ones that can establish their territory, the females are like, hey, I want some of him because he's giving off these markers of being a super awesome
Okay.
alpha male that'll give good
Then what's the
offspring.
parallel in
Hold on,
humans?
let me finish. I was just gonna say, the dude orangutans that cannot establish a territory, they still want some, and so they will force the issue with female orangutans they encounter. And
Okay.
so it's not cynical, it's real. And it's
Well,
not
but
just
you just said we weren't
orangutans.
apes.
That's what I believe because I believe we were created by God. But when you talk about evolutionists, according to
I never
evolutionary
talked of
theory,
apes. I talked of humans and tribal behavior.
I said primate. I didn't say ape. I said primate. So primate, like canine is wolf, dog, everything in between. Equine is horse, donkey, zebra.
Right.
Primate is the entire, according to evolutionists who believe this, not I. Primate is man to, monkey and every other ape in between, or orangutan or gorilla or whatever. So
Okay.
that's only my point is, according to real world evolution, it's totally okay. Now, I believe it's wrong. I believe that a man
Well, I
who does
also
that
believe it's wrong,
should
but in
be
accordance with
executed.
evolution, because we're
No,
not.
it shows an evolution where it's a thing. It's not wrong.
Well, it's crazy that you
happens.
look back and you see that primates aren't baboons, and that primates and humans are their own common ancestor, and that we are completely divulgent of our. The point that I was going to make a moment ago is that you see that same kind of behavior in humans, except it's a king, it's a governor, it's a politician, and a leader. Those are the people who end up staking out, and not through exactly marker signals, but social marker signals, building a tribe. It's exactly the same in its own unique way.
But you got to agree that the organization structure and everything is totally far beyond anything within the animal kingdom.
That us, yeah. And then that even ties back into that whole stoned ape theory I was talking about. No, I think that humans, in a lot of aspects, are animals, and while we're definitely transcendent above the rest, you can't really say that that's anything other than our mind. And in that, I mean,
by far though, and I mean like,
no, astronomical.
Yeah, astronomical.
And you see that where it's our might can't go up against even the strongest gorilla or the fastest tiger or a cheetah. We can get really close, but we can't overcome that. And the idea there,
we can shoot them.
Oh, you can shoot them. But how was it that we made guns other than our mind and our intuition and our ability to detract and look at the environment and reverse engineer it? You could probably in some ways extrapolate the concept of a firearm all the way back to a volcano bursting and people witnessing that and like the majesty of that. And it's the sense that we're able to recognize those patterns that we're able to overcome the rest. But ultimately, I think like I feel like creationism and science are both lenses to view the same thing, where if you can look at one and say that something happened, it tends to have parallels directly into the other. And with that,
so there's no science that does not, no absolute science, I should say, that can actually refute creation, And
closest thing we have is the Big Bang and all the celestial processes.
You and I were laughing about that earlier, so we already know. It's like, but at the same time, there are, to me, anything that has not been observed or proven through actual science, like the Big Bang Theory and like macroevolution, to me, those takes just as much faith as it does. I think more. Actually,
and that's exactly my point: is that there's faith involved even with science.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And there's a thing I wrote down here that I'd like to get to in a moment, but go ahead.
All right. Before we move forward, though, can I quote this to you about the atheist that with the morals or whatever the case?
No, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. All right. So it's found in Romans 1, starting at verse 18. It says, "For the wrath of God." So they're like the Old Testament God. I just wanted to tell you.
It's the wrath. Yeah, the wrath
This is the
of
New
God.
Testament. This is the New Testament right here. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power in Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So God has given everyone a sense of understanding of right and wrong. I really believe that. How far you take it to one way or another, it's up to the individual. But yet we all understand, and there's a lot of proof of it from people coming from lines of good turning bad, and people's coming from lines. I'm talking about heritage, like lineages. Lineages of bad and choosing to be good,
Right.
And so, but in the biblical Christian aspect, it's not necessarily a bad or good thing. It's a wicked and righteous thing. And righteousness comes from God alone, because and that's where I wanted to go into the Buddhism thing, who believe that there's a way that you can find inner peace. I'm like, but nobody's perfect. So how do you find peace in something so flawed? You know what I mean?
And I think that's what PJ was asking about, the finding order in chaos.
Right, right.
And it's funny to believe that, I mean, if you're attributed to science, order is entirely, a product of man, and if you believe in creationism, order is entirely a product of God and derivative of man.
Mhm.
And, through that, it actually ties really well into the thing I wanted to talk about, because he's mentioned the Big Bang Theory, and a lot of these ideas of, morality and stuff. I wanted to touch on that with, I actually had a friend recently who was dating somebody in Korea. And the interesting thing about that was, you mentioned the ability to distinguish right from wrong as a God-given right, yet you'll find other cultures view completely different concepts as right and wrong. My friend basically got dumped because he completely unintentionally and inadvertently insulted a family member through a simple gesture, a family member of this girl he was dating. And that was it, because that was wrong. But the gesture that was seen as wrong was my friend trying to buy a illustration of a cartoon character that just happened by circumstance to look like their family member who was deceased. It was a
wow.
kind gesture met with negativity.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting that you can see
mean-
such dissonances through just culture alone.
Well, that's cultural preference. I don't think that's the same thing necessarily as moral and immoral. They still know not to steal. They still probably know, I'm sure, that you shouldn't lie.
But my friend knew not to insult family, yet somehow managed to.
Yeah, but I mean, that wasn't something that he did on purpose. Like I said, that's more of a cultural or maybe even a family preference thing. And so, like, there's some families in America here that, at the dinner table, if you put your elbows up on there, they find you highly disrespectful.
Oh, absolutely.
So like, for instance, okay, I'm over in Jamaica. My wife's Jamaican, right? She's over in Jamaica, right? I have a tendency of smelling my food before I eat it. When somebody hands me a plate, I go like this, because I want the aroma to match with my home, with the hunger and all that kind of stuff, And she tells me that's rude. I'm like, what? How's that rude? And so, like, it's cultural differences, and so I don't think that ties into more. Now, when it comes to a moral issue, that's when you're thinking more of like lying, killing, cheating, stealing, that sort of thing, because that's where ethics and morals come from, or the lack thereof.
And it's like the parallel there that I was drawing a moment ago was that through God you are given these things, but through the lens of evolution and science, like I was saying with tribal behavior, it's the same thing. Where lying, stealing, cheating, all these different traits that people have that are viewed as extremely negative line up in that exact same way, where you wouldn't want to do that if you were living in a tribal society, because it would be a detriment to the whole. And it's interesting because then at that point it's like, oh, well, then who taught man to start, going into these groups? And it's really interesting because the further and further and further and further you go back, you end up finding the same answer, which is simply there was an origin point. And whether or not that's God or the Big Bang, and that's the thing, the segue I had here for that.
Well, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just try to answer that real quick before you go there.
Absolutely.
God created us to want to need each other.
Yeah.
The first thing, one of the first things he said when he saw that Adam was alone, he said that man should not be alone. So in the Bible sense, there's areas where it talks about a friend that sticks closer to you than a brother.
Right.
Okay. In most aspects, your brother is probably the closest thing to you. But they're talking about Jesus being this friend that sticks closer to you than even your brother. But yet we need our brother. We need our sister. We need our
your family. You need your tribe.
Even adopted family. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, that's the concept. Jesus himself said, while his literal brothers and sisters and his mom was waiting outside, and somebody came in and told him, your brothers and your mother and your sisters outside. He said, who is my mom? Who is my mother, my brother, and my sisters? But he or she who does the will of my Father. You know what I mean? So that's what, so yeah, there is a tribal sense of things, but at the same time, because we basically, we feed off each other's energy in a sense.
And it's crazy. You boil that down and you strip it of connotation of term and influences, and at its very core, it's simple that something makes us want to stick together.
Yeah. Yeah, and
regardless of what lens.
and wanting to be about something, that's where you get the game societies from.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to equate the tribal. You can convince yourself that doing wrong is doing right, depending on the people that you're hanging around.
Absolutely.
That's something else that the Bible says. It says that we shouldn't be deceived because how does it go? Corinthians 10:13, I believe. Good bad company corrupts good character. You know what I mean? And so and it can, and I've seen it done so many times. And
you're only as good as those around you. Yeah.
Sometimes it happened to me being the one corrupting people. You know what I'm saying? but praise God that what I do now is try to get people to come to where there's light, out of the darkness, because I've been in the darkness, and so I know what it feels like in so many aspects. You know what I mean? And so with that being said, we're tribal by nature. Even those who would consider themselves as introverts, they still have their tribe, because
the introverts in tribal society were the shamans and the medicine men.
Exactly.
The thoughtful ones who would sit and wait and contemplate just about everything.
Yeah.
PJ had his hand up.
So I have peace. I have 2 questions. Question number 1, who does this earth belong to? And question number 2, who do humans belong to?
So if you want, you can go into what you have to say first and then go into that question, because I know you've been waiting to because I think that's taking us off subject a little bit.
Really quickly and easily to answer those, actually.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Who does the earth belong to and who does man belong to? I would like to believe that earth belongs to nobody other than that is, on it, at least. We're you heard this phrase thrown around quite a bit, is that we're inheritors of the earth, but we don't own it. And I believe that to be very true. And there was a thing actually I wanted to touch on earlier where we were talking about morality and things like that. And it's this really nice concept I came up with recently about the master of the now, master of present. If you look at the concept of past, present, and future, and this does line back up, you have past, which is, reflection on events. You have the future, which is prediction of events. And you have the present, which is simply acting and making the event. And, through that, the master of the now, well, to be able to master the present, you have to have both foresight and, inspection of the past. You have to be both a historian and the person making prophecies. And through that, you end up basically wearing the clothes for the occasion. And the interesting thing about that is you can see this in a lot of natives and a lot of aboriginals, where they're in complete synergy with their environment, using only what they have to, making the most of what they have. And there are a few exceptions where it's either wasteful or over industrious. That's what we call the Western world. And you end up getting this really interesting thing where the master of the now and the snowy mountains is the man with the parka and the snow equipment, and the master of the now in the desert is the man with the reflective robes, white robes, and the water skin. And the master of the now is applicative to the situation that they're a parent in, whether that's social, environmental, or otherwise. A master of the now in a social situation knows many stories and many tales and many, attributed relative topics so that they can counter and talk about just about anything. And then to relate that back into, who does man belong to? From the lens of the creationist, man belongs to God. But interestingly enough, while God wants worship, he also just wants us to be ourselves. And through the lens of evolution and science, we are our own masters, and you can come to the same conclusion from God wanting you to be an individual, is that you are your own master. Just remember where you came from. That's all that they ask. Be respectful of it. Be a master of the now. Synergize with your environment.
I never heard it vocalized like that before, and that's interesting. That take.
And I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
And that is, and this is to anybody, of course, but who is responsible for the earth?
It's interesting. There's actually of all things, it's a concept in writing for the story of a video game. But in the Halo series, they have these people called the Forerunners, and the idea is that these Forerunners are exactly as their name dictates, and that they they were the Forerunner progenitor race of everything. They were the most powerful people that made all of these crazy alien things. Like you see, like the movie Alien or these sci-fi movies, where it's like there's some whimsical, crazy stuff technologically that we don't understand. Well, these people in this universe are the ones who made that. And the interesting thing about them is that in that series, there's this concept called the mantle of responsibility. And the mantle of responsibility, and you can imagine it exactly as it is, a mantle where like a cape worn over the shoulders, is a mantle of responsibility that falls upon the absolute strongest in paradigm of existence and life. And if you ask me who the earth is responsible for the earth, who inherits the earth to draw back onto that, that would be us. And we're absolutely messing it up.
Interesting.
And even more so with that, to go into the topic that I've been poking at, because it's basically just a synonym for pattern recognition. Do you guys know what a fractal is, or fractalization?
Is that what you was telling me about earlier?
What I was telling you about earlier with the fern, and interestingly enough, you'll get it through conversation and just about everything, and it's described as the pattern for life and reality as we know it, because there's just a constant string of cosmic, spiritual, and scientific noise that we can get these patterns out of. And even drawing it back even further with the idea of the Bible and prophecy, where if the Bible was simply, blinds with holes cut in it, anything that happens to fall behind the lens of the Bible that matches up with the prophecy will always be the prophesized event or individual. And then I mentioned, well, interestingly, that would that be cyclic? And there's an interesting theory. I mean, the thing you posted about the uh Tom, the thing you posted about the World War II craft that's lodged in the ice. There was situations where we found things akin to fuses in ancient pottery, like an electrical fuse, or they found something that looked to be a watch in an Egyptian tomb, or in that's theorized right now, and this is one of my favorites, although it's probably false, that there's pyramids under the snow in Antarctica. And you end up getting this idea of maybe we've done this before, and maybe the Bible's just gone through a mini remissions, and that maybe science and understanding, like Greek and Roman aqueducts, was forgotten, rediscovered, and put back into practice. And you kind of begin to get an interesting perspective with that because of the idea of a fractal. And I can actually pull up an image of a fractal if you're curious. The best natural, and then I got this as well from Terence McKenna. The idea of a fractal is something like a fern. And if you look at the object that is a fern, you can zoom in on it and see that microscopically and not so microscopically, the fern is made up of hundreds of smaller fern-like structures. And you'll see that in conversation even. Right now, a lot of these ideas I've gone over before. It's a pattern just playing itself back out over and over and over again. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. You're just going to make the same mistake if you don't document and understand. And it's just a lot of these things you see, orbits around the planets and celestial bodies. It's a pattern here, pattern there. We see so many patterns. And even pulling it back to Terence McKenna and the idea of psychedelics and spirituality, you end up falling into this hole of whenever you take psychedelics, whether or not it's part of the human brain, as some like to believe, or something even further spiritual, you'll see shapes. You'll see these fractals. And on the one hand, you look at it spiritually and you think maybe there's an extra overlaid layer upon the world where there is this sacred geometry, this holy, these divine shapes that you see everywhere. Or looking at it through the lens of science, it's simply the brain reacting to it. But then what's that to say about the brain other than it can make these advanced patterns? It just confirms the same thing no matter which way you look at it. I feel like that's a bit very far off topic, but it's really good food for thought, I'd like to think.
I'm curious. This is along the lines of the morals and who decides what truth and who decides what morals are. Let me just jump to it. You know, w- how do we determine right and wrong? Like, who determines right and wrong? Like, specifically wrong. How is wrong determined? Like, who makes the determination for what is wrong? Who gets to choose what's wrong?
And a lot of the times we look towards religion for this, and through the idea of disillusionment through evolution. It's simply said that the leaders of a community are the ones who determine what's right and wrong. That it's the leaders of a tribe or an environment that say what's right and wrong. And then through the lens of creationism, we say it's a God-given understanding that's preached through others, or simply, divined from the book or the scripture that is right and wrong. But who wrote the book? And you go back into this kind of feedback loop where you start realizing that we really dictate our own morality, where everybody in this room has their own slight skew of it, where I think something's right that you might think that's wrong. But ultimately, we go back to these guide stones that are creationism, or my idea from earlier of what's best for the community through the base most biological urge to form a group and make a tribe. That's what's best for that group. There's so many different angles for that, but ultimately I think it's the individual.
Well, my question then would be to that. My follow-up to that would be, so what happens when that group interacts with another group who has a different set
You
of
get the
morals?
Crusades.
So now this brings me to the ultimate question then. The ultimate question is there a such thing as absolute truth?
Yes. I think we struggle to find that every day through every medium possible. Stories, tales, video games, movies, everything. It's our constant recollection of experiences, and even through religion, where we sit back and say, yeah, what is the origin point? Stephen Hawking said it was the red shift of planets moving away from some, presumed core origin point. For us, the origin point is God creation, or in Genesis, creating all of the known solar bodies in our system in 6 days, and presumably, in addition, the rest of the universe. The absolute truth is simply understanding what everything means. And ultimately, right now, I think the suitable answer to that in today's world is just equilibrium with the environment and yourself. I think most people would find that equilibrium and, working with your environment, working with those around you, a lot like this YouTube channel and these talks, fruitful discussion, you end up piling your ideas together to find this ultimate truth. And in my opinion, that ever since I was a very, 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 very young little adolescent 11-year-old Mike, that was my morality. Whenever I was an atheist, I threw away the idea of divine, spiritual, given morality and said, what is the objective morality through just looking around me? And it's that the progression of our race as people, the global tribe, if you will, the global gospel or church group, if you will, where you look at the entire human race and what are we doing? We're always striving to understand more. And the ultimate truth in that regard is understanding and better preparing ourselves to, look for that truth. And I don't think we're ever going to find it.
So let me ask this question then. And this is my last question. Can there ever be peace without absolute truth?
No. There will always be war. There will always be conflict. Even if nothing else, the slight bit of friction between me and Tom here tonight over creationism and science goes to show that alone. I mean, as long as you have individuality, you will have conflict. If we want a shortcut to peace, I think we better start working on becoming a hive mind, like bees or something, because as long as we're individual people, we're not going to find that. You're going to have some absolutely crazy thing happen, and this is honestly the plot of a video game as well, where on a desert planet, these people end up finding an ancient starship buried under the sand, and it has one word on a stone plaque on the inside directing them on a star map to the center of their galaxy, and that word in that game was Higara. The translation is home. That united that entire race because, oh my goodness, that means something's going on. What if you imagine we unburied something, unearthed something in Antarctica of the same caliber that says this is not even, scripture, but simply something pointing to something else from a long forgotten time saying that is where we need to go. That's unity. I think that's what every single religion strives for, is a degree of unity. And without unity, there will always be chaos.
Do you
So-
believe that?
I was wondering, a lot of the discussion we've been talking about is a bit ethereal, if I can.
No, absolutely.
And so to bring it into nuts and bolts, you're still in the young immortal phase where I'm assuming you are wiser than your years, so maybe you're beyond that. But I'm remembering myself around your age, shoot, I could take the whole world and nothing was gonna happen, and I knew that I was mortal, but like really, yeah, let's get real. I'm not gonna die. But now that I'm, 40, it's like, well, hell, hold on now. That last 20 years went by in a blink, and so the next 20 are gonna also be a blink. And then if I'm lucky, I'll be 60, and then Bible says 70 is the general lifespan of man, which that's 70 years. I've already, according to that, that generalization, I've already lived over half my life. So whether it's, I choke on a Cheeto later tonight, or, I live another, 30 years, whatever, or even if I live another 60, I get all the way up to, 100 or whatever. At some point, I'm going to breathe my last. And then from there, things get really real, because there's either an afterlife or not. And I'm either eternally non-existent, or I'm in some sort of afterlife. I'm either in, oh crap, here it was all the time, and I was, worshiping the Christian God, or it's Christian God, and I'm like, whoo, me and Jesus are cool, or whatever. All I'm saying is, with that foreknowledge, and using that, 70-year standard that the Bible throws out there just for discussion's sake, right there, that means you got about more or less 50 years, all things together, that you don't get hit by a bus, or heaven forbid, or whatever,
or get cancer or disease or anything
right.
else that's right.
One of a million other possible.
There's a lot of ways to die, but there's also a lot of ways to live.
Right. And so I guess my question is, what do you believe, is after death? Because I believe I believe what we believe as far as origins of the world and ourselves, and also, what deity we believe in or not, that also informs how we see beyond our own existence, because we all got a time clock on us.
And I feel like the objectivity of that question is simply, if we go off of science, and this is something I want to touch on, going off of this, probably the last thing tonight. I'm not sure how much time we have.
It would be the last thing.
All right.
Yeah.
So then I'll make this good. Objectivity through science and logic says there is nothing. But yet you have religion that says, through a very comforting fact, that there is something. It's the afterlife, but we don't really particularly know what that is. We read about it, we know of it, and we know what the scripture says. Buddhism says it's another run here. If you aren't good enough, you get to try again. A lot of other races, a lot of other religions say, it's one thing or the other. But my answer to it, you asked for my beliefs, is why the heck does it matter? And my answer to that is, you have the left brain and the right brain. The logical and the emotional. And I've come to learn through the recent months and weeks of, looking at just studies, and namely psychedelics is what, of all things, brought me up to this. But you have the emotional that is to the spiritual, as is the logical is to the scientific. And I feel like modern society has completely lost touch with what it means to be spiritual and emotional in a healthy and organized way. And to say you can organize emotion is a bit of, an oxymoron in and of itself, because emotion by default is chaos. You can't choose when you get to feel happy. You can't choose when you get to feel sad. It's always a reaction to something that's happened. But yet, with concreteness, you can make a schedule using, written language. And in that way, I've come to realize that with the spiritual, whether or not you believe anything to do with it, it's just completely up to whether or not you believe at all. And in that, explaining that even further, one story that I tell you, religion or story or tale for a moral or anything else, it doesn't matter what lengths are taken through that discussion or scripture or anything, as long as it's a flavor that one individual or a multiple individuals can understand. I mean, I hear people talking about taking shrooms or tripping on LSD, and one person will argue with the other over whether or not what they saw was real. But why does it matter if it's real or not, regardless of if, that it made sense to you? It made sense. Your afterlife and my afterlife both make sense to us, and unless you have proper, concrete, internalized security with what that is, you'll always be afraid. I got an alarm going off. Give me just one sec. What wonderful timing. Whether or not you and I believe in that is completely indicative of your fear regarding death. Is your security in that belief something that you're okay with and that you feel concrete with? And if some other religion or group came along and spoke it to you in such a way that was far more agreeable than Christianity, I'd like to think maybe you'd try to put a spin on that with Christian beliefs too. It's spirituality is about the individual. Spirituality is about how well you can be in tune with your emotions and that around you. Because, like I said, through science, there's an origin point. Through spirituality, there's an origin point. But ultimately, how can you quantify and be comfortable with that origin? What flavor is easier to swallow for you?
And in theory, I see what you're saying. And from this side of the abyss, you're right. My point is that side of the abyss is where it matters. And so I don't know how to else to explain it, but I'm a deer hunter. I was out hunting and there was a buck. He didn't know I was there. And then all of a sudden he was in my frying pan. So he didn't know I was there, but then all of a sudden he was dead.
And even going off of that, to agree with you even, I had to recently teach a friend of mine the concept of stoicism, to let easy come, easy go, and to realize that everything that you do is, it should at least be the best of your ability. You should live to your fullest every chance and opportunity that you get, and through living to the best of your capability, you build a certain degree of confidence in that anything that happens is beyond me now, because I've already played my part. And whenever you take death into consideration in that fact, you were right in assuming that I'm beyond my years and that I'm not afraid of death. I mean, heck, it's going to be scary when it comes to my face. I'm probably going to jump or cry or yell or get upset, but ultimately, as long as I'm doing everything that I can with my life and my body and my mind in the now, I've done my part, and anything beyond that point is simply cosmic coincidence or preordained by God or scientific probability, whatever flavor you want to throw it in. It's going to happen. It's an inevitability, and you should learn to accept it with that degree of stoicism as early as you can. Otherwise, you're going to run through your entire life seeking distractions instead of that truth.
I also dabble in the Stoics, but I find them incomplete for the very reason I was previously talking about. In that, yeah, they do have certain good points that, it's good to, especially as a man, to kind of tighten up your emotions and to try to, gain a certain level of control over your life. But that only gets you so far, I guess.
And that's the key to that is in the statement itself, and that control your emotion, dampen down your emotion. How come? Why? Why would you deny a natural part of yourself for the sake of logic or an otherwise? And of course, you can make the argument that you have to lighten the load on a car to have a longer trek. I mean, obviously, you're adapting to the situation, but that car is still always going to be able to carry that load regardless of if or not it's there. And in the same way,
But that's the entire point of the Stoics, is to
exactly
get a hold of the emotions.
And the entire point of Christianity is to learn to love and with God, be one with God. And this is the thing that I was saying earlier about why must everybody be so concrete, in that I view every bit of information I take in as an aspect of a metaphysical toolbox I've got. If I can take these things, all of them, and not stick to one of them in any one way and blend them together in a way that does emotionally and spiritually resonate with me, then I have nothing to be afraid of. And that I can be stoic and emotional and loving and caring of God, but also cynical and atheistic all at once.
Yeah, but wouldn't you be a walking, talking oxymoron?
I already am.
But on a serious note.
Did you just call him an oxymoron?
No, I asked the question.
Not cool, bro. Not cool.
I asked the question. And I mean, well, it's hard for me personally to find, comfort in something that I came up with myself. Like I said before, I know that I'm flawed, and I know there's only one perfect person, whoever walked the earth. And so I would rather put my trust in him than myself and what I could come up with.
I don't trust in myself. I trust in the world at large. And the thing is with that is we all walk day to day trusting the creations of other individuals who damn well understood and trusted themselves.
Exactly. And the world is a creation as well. Why not trust in the one who created the world?
Because he trusted in himself whenever he made it.
Yeah,
and he trusted in himself when he made you, and it's not hubris, it's confidence.
He's perfect, and we're not, though.
But we should strive to be. And what better way to do that than going towards that truth we discussed earlier?
But what happens every time you hit a brick wall, though?
Every time you hit a what now?
A brick wall, which are striving for perfection.
We find a way to get through it, and we've done it since our conception, and we'll continue to do it until our death.
But I think that's an exception to the rule, to be honest with you.
Well, we're going to hit a wall we can't get past one of these days.
No. And okay, you can say this is my opinion, but more so is my belief.
All right.
That when you go through life in that concept, deep depression comes on, and failureism, and everything.
Defeatism, yes, yeah.
Yeah. And everything that, now you can put on a facade to make it seem like you're still striving, but at the core of your being, that you're defeated in every act, because you've been doing this and going at this for years and years and years and years and years, and yet you keep hitting it, no matter how successful you have been, no matter how much money you have made, no matter how many friends you got, yet there's still an aspect of failure because you never reached the point where you were trying.
And there was that interesting discussion we had a while ago about the Mouse Utopia experiment, and denying people want, basically, and always having plenty. And the interesting thing in that scenario is a lot of the mice ended up making what I like to call artificial conflict. And you see that a lot in the world right now, where if we don't have any problems to solve, we'll damn well start making our own.
Yes.
People need conflict to go forward.
No, I mean, we do in this fallen state that we're in, because, we get trapped by boredom, and we need something to make us feel a part of, that we can just snap at and give us a bit of, of significance, and,
right.
And
we have meaning,
Yeah. And to be a vigilante at one point, or to, just go against the grind or something that's going to cause some kind of excitement and release some kind of dopamines that's different than this natural, normal, peaceful type of, but that's a fallen state.
And isn't it
mind,
interesting how the older we get and the more wisdom we accrue, we attribute that to be an absolute negative quality, that level of foolhardiness and seeking adventure.
Yeah, but also misery loves company.
Yeah.
And so again, when for me, and I promise you, I'm not trying to criticize anything that you believe, but in that concept of belief, that I can't see peace coming from it, because everything, all your solutions, all your answers basically come from, even though it's a smorgasbord of different beliefs, but it's still based on your own understanding. And then it cannot explain itself, because you are the person who explains it. You know what I'm saying? So it can only make sense to you. And maybe, I can see you having followers, because dude,
man,
seriously, but at the same time, but how far does that go when you base something off of just basically a fallen understanding, no matter how
well, then what you're saying right there is that you're saying your own religion is a degree of, has a degree of falsity to it, and that is a fallen belief system. Because a lot of my beliefs are based in Christianity, as well as Buddhism and Greek and Roman and, the Aboriginals of, South America and everything. I see truths in everything. And in that same way, I look at the qualities that resonate the most with me. I don't deny one or the other. I look at the beliefs and morality of Christianity and say, hey, that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. I like being able to be kind to my neighbor and make it, foster a community and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that has overlaps with ideas of Buddhism, where let's all sit down and sing hunky-dory around a campfire and, feel good about things.
But the thing is, man, just because you may take the smorgasbord, approach and pick out one portion of Christianity, does not then prove any falsehood on the part of Christianity.
No, it doesn't.
That's just, you may view it as such, but that's
no. What I was saying
to borrow a quote from the great Lebowski, that's like your opinion, man.
Oh, absolutely. I know. And the thing is too is that I think, and I opened up with the statement that everything is wrong and everything is right. And what I meant by that is just what I orchestrated a few moments ago, and that you can find your solution amongst the sea of ideas, because there's quite a few out there. And in that aspect, I'm completely wrong, because my idea doesn't make sense to you. But I'm completely right to me.
It's not so much that it doesn't make sense to me. It's just that how do you deal with a religion of conflicting ideas, and that's the thing.
It's like I think they say it's a double negative, in that you have 2 minus 2. Well, it's going to equate itself to 0, and in the case of religions, like you said, there's so many conflicting ideas all across the board. I'd dare to say it's equally parallel all across, and because of that, in my eyes, they're all equally wrong. And because of that, I end up getting back this equilibrium of what PJ asked earlier of, then what is truth? And that's a dang good question, because I don't know, and neither does another guy. So what do? You make peace with the now.
Let me ask this. Do you think truth is obtainable?
And I answered that earlier, where I think it's only as attainable as humanity as a whole wants it to be, because no one man's going to get there.
Well, I guess here's my point on that is, and I guess we have a different view on God, so that can kind of answer the breakdown in that difference.
Sure.
But if I believe in a personal God that, like, on a throne at the center of the universe, there is God the Father. He's all powerful. He can be anywhere that he wants to at any one time, but like that's his crib. That's where he hangs out.
Right.
And then from there, he directs everything. And then Jesus, his only begotten son, which is also equal God, same as him, he came down to be the emissary to save fallen humanity and that sort of thing. And the Bible is what tells of him. And so there is such, from the Bible, it outlines a controversy between God and Satan, where God is saying my government is best, Satan is saying no, mine is. And so all in the world, he's going to have a bunch of smoke and mirrors everywhere to try and deflect from the true religion of God as expressed in the Bible. Because, and again, as I pointed out, all those other sacred texts have no prophecies. They're single writers generally, except for the Hadiths. There's some others. But anyway, what I find is many people who especially adhere to some form of evolution Christianity hybrid, or, you know, really tend to go down the philosophy road, they like to basically, you know, theorize everything. So when the Bible says there was a flood, they're like, well, not really. And if there was a flood, it wasn't worldwide, and so on and so forth. Like when the Bible talks
And you know,
about
and that's
God
exactly the
split,
same. That's exactly the same as trying to do what you're doing to science. Science looks at you with its flavor of belief and says, "Look, there's contradictions," and you look back
right?
at it and say,
But
"Look,
and
there's contradictions there," and you try
I
to make sense
love
of it
how
one
you
way or
said
the
with in
other.
favor of belief, because it's a
We all
belief.
believe the same thing at the end of
yeah,
the
and
day.
science is a belief, bro. Science is a religion,
Well,
just as
it
Christianity
depends on
is a
what kind of science
religion.
you're talking about. All right, but we're going to go ahead and stop on that note, because I can see you guys going in.
Oh, thank you
The
for
sad
having
part
me.
is,
Thank you for
the
having
sad
me.
part is I love listening to it, so I don't know when to stop myself. But I'll say 1 minute for each person. Any closing remarks?
Thank you for
And
having me.
we'll start with PJ. We're going to end with you, though. Okay.
Oh, sure.
All right, PJ. Any closing remarks?
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Peace.
Amen. TJ, any closing remarks?
Well, and again, I guess my main focal point as to the reason you can elevate the Bible above, you know, the Quran, or, you know, any of these other sacred texts. You know, I had the whole list up there. The only reason is because of the prophetic record. And so one thing I would just challenge, if you'd be interested in, is when you instead are slinging some dough, talk about some certain specific ones that you can be like, okay, AD 800 or whatever it was, no, BC 800, Daniel said this about Cyrus, who then came like a couple hundred years later, and he could outline specifics where, and Josiah Litch recently, relatively recently, in the 1840s, he said, hey guys, Bible prophecy says the Ottoman Empire is going to collapse in this month. And then ahead of time, he said that. And then it's going to be what, you know what? I think he pointed to the exact day when the Ottoman Empire would fall. And he got this all from the book of Revelation. And everyone was like, man, you're nuts. That'd be like us modern day saying, you know, the CCP, the Communist Party of China, is going to completely collapse and ask the United States to take over. But it happened. And it was all because he was able to find that through the Bible. One last illustration before I turn it over.
Yeah, of course.
All throughout the Middle East, they had oil, all these nations, and they're like, Egypt didn't have oil, all the rest of them. They're like, how is this that we don't have oil and all of our neighbors do? They contacted some oil speculator who was a Christian. They're like, hey, can you come find us oil? And he went there and he's like, okay, in the Bible, it talks about little baby Moses, whose mother took a basket of bulrushes and covered it with pitch on the river Nile. Pitch must have been petroleum based. So he went testing up and down the Nile, and he actually studied basically where like the Hebrew slave quarters roughly probably would have been, and that's where he found oil for the Egyptian government. And so there are different specific parts in the Bible that we can point to in the Bible prophetic history. This is real. And so anyway, if you have any interest at all, I just challenge you to kind of poke down those rabbit holes a bit.
No, I love that kind of stuff, but no, I just hope
All
that
right.
each and every one of you listening finds peace with yourself and finds something from these talks. I'm absolutely thrilled to have been here tonight. I had such good discussions with all of you. I mean, I don't really have much else to say other than it was a great experience.
And I thank everyone for coming on. I definitely appreciate the talk. I think that, I think that a lot of people are going to be impressed with this conversation, I thank you for coming on. I thank you for being willing to come on. I thank you for being transparent and, and just open and honest, man, because it takes a lot for anyone to come on and do what you did, and, you might get some flack from your friends when you show them. That's fine.
Oh, I doubt it.
Okay, that's good. But I mean,
I
the
hope
good
not
thing is,
anyway.
the good thing is, man, hey, like your mind, the way you think and all that is very impressive, especially for your age, man. I think that my friends slash co-hosts, they probably thought that I was like over exaggerating the way you think and how our conversations go, and so they got to experience it themselves today. And but at least for the next 2 weeks before I head out, man, we'll have a few more conversations. I do plan on coming back, but I don't know where God's going to lead me, man. But we have each other's numbers, and and if it's possible, of course, I think we'll let her have you on again. At some
Whenever
point.
it's convenient for you.
Yeah, same to you, man. And God bless you in your endeavors, man.
I hope I end up doing something with myself.
Sky's the limit, man. You have the potential and you have the knowledge, man. But I can see you being a preacher of the gospel. I just want you to know that. I really can. And I can see you.
That means a lot, actually.
I honestly can. I honestly can. That's the potential that I saw in you when I first met you. But hey, to God be the glory for everything. And I'm going to go ahead and close down the meeting. Guys, love you. And thanks again for everyone being on. And I'll see you tomorrow, brother.
Yeah.
God bless.
Like PJ says, peace.
Right. Blessings, everyone.
Peace be unto all.
Yes.